So now that you have mastered driving, we're going to actually start connecting some sensors and doing a little bit more, a deeper coding using if statements or if-else statements. Before we do that, we're going to actually clear out our programs on our app and on our bricks. Let me show you how to do that. Turn on my brick here. Actually, while that's loading, I'm going to set that aside. And I'll jump over to my iPad, and then I'll show you how to delete programs on there. And I'll come back to this as this is loading. So on our iPad, you can add new programs across the bottom. So for instance, let's say you want to program it to do a specific task, and then you want that to be saved on there. So that way, every time you want to do that task, you can open that program and you can run it. So you can have multiple programs going across here. Let's just say, though, that we have a whole bunch of new ones and we don't want them anymore. What we can do, there's a little clicky finger up here. And what that says is select programs, and then we can choose all the programs that we have, and we can either delete or we can duplicate. So this duplicate feature might be very, very helpful. Because if we create a if-then statement like we're going to be using today, and let's say that you want to just modify it to use a different sensor, but you don't want to overwrite or you don't want to change that program, you can simply duplicate it. That way you have something to start with, like a base, in order to write the rest of your program. So if you wanted to go ahead and delete your programs that you don't need, that's fine. Something else to show you is that if you actually click on the word underneath it, or the name, we can change it. So mine's just called example. Okay, I can delete it, rename it. Let's say test. Great. So we can rename them. So if you have a whole bunch of them that are called program 1, program 2, program 3, and you want to go in at some point and rename them, coming back to the home screen here is a place where you can rename them. So I have all those deleted. I have a blank slate. This is my test. This is what I'm going to use today. Before we do that, let's take some time and let's clear out our brick, because there's a lot of programs on here, either that you sent to it or possibly that were there, very likely, when you started working with these bricks. So how we delete these programs and get this whole thing cleared out. Right now we are under like the run part of the program. If we go over one, this is going to be our file manager. And if we're in this and we click on it again, we're going to get this option here that says, hey, do you want to delete it? I'm going to go over to delete, hit the select button, go over to check mark. That means, yep, I want to do that. And it's going to delete that. Okay, looks like somebody had one on here called Tracker. That was a program they had saved. So I can go through here, delete that. There's a lot of programs on here, so it might take you a little bit, but I think it would be wise for you to clear all these bricks out. So if you want to, why don't you go ahead and pause the video right now and clear all of the programs out of your brick. Okay, now assuming, let's pretend just for sake of example that these are all cleared out. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be attaching some sensors that are going to trigger our motors to do certain things. Okay? So I have my brick. Let's get it connected here. Slide it over. Select an accessory. It should pop up here in a second. That's me. And once again, if it doesn't connect right away, like you see, so I want to ignore that. Like you see up here, it's not connected. Let me go ahead and I'm gonna close the program, and then I'm gonna reopen it. Let's see what happens here. Still not connected. Let's clear it out again. Not sure why this is the solution, but this seems to be the solution. There we go. I didn't do anything different this time, and for whatever reason, it's now connected. So now what I've done is I've actually connected to an Ev3 that belongs to a student group. That way you can see the actual activity we're going to be doing. What we're going to be starting with is we're going to be connecting some sensors to the front of this robot. What sensors I need you to find in your kit. If you don't have them, please let me know. We have one that looks like this. This is a touch sensor or push sensor. And this one here that kind of looks like Wally. This is an ultrasonic sensor. So this detects distance. Push sensor, touch sensor, distance sensor. Now if we look at the bottom, on this one, we see that we have two motors already connected. So we have a motor in B and we have a motor in C. And it's telling us what degree those are in. I want to physically connect these here. So here's how we do that. We have this little black connector piece. Looks like this. I would like for you to take it and I would like for you to snap it in to the back, the last hole. Then what we do is we slide the sensor onto that front peg and we can just simply snap it in. So now our little ultrasonic sensor is on the front of our robot. Let's do the same thing for our touch sensor. We have to do the connection peg on the other side. That way we can slide it on here and snap this one in. So now we have both. We have our touch sensor and our ultrasonic sensor connected. Now we notice here that we have our motors plugged into B and C, and that is correct. So motors get plugged into the letters. Sensors get plugged into numbers. So I have a couple more connection wires here. I'm going to plug in the ultrasonic. It doesn't matter necessarily what port, but something I do want you to pay attention to is trying to make sure that you can keep your wires from rubbing. So let me snap this in. There it goes. Okay, and so it's rubbing on this tire right here. So let's see if we can figure out how can I wrap this around, twist this a little bit. Actually, let's go through here. That'll work for mine. Just try to keep it from rubbing on those tires. I'm going to plug this into 3. Once I plug it into 3, watch down here. There it goes. It notices that that's an ultrasonic sensor plugged into port 3. I'm going to take this. Okay, I'm going to plug in my touch sensor here. Let me get that one. May have been easier, in fact, to connect these sensors before attaching them, but that's okay. All right, snap that one in. It's not showing up yet because I don't have this attached. Let's feed it back through here. Let's keep these wires under control a little bit. And let's wrap it around and let's plug it into, well, 4 is right here. Doesn't really matter. So I'll plug it into port 4. Like that. Great. And it says, hey, I have a push sensor in port 4. So we have our robot attached like this. Now what we need to do is we need to have this do a trigger where it's constantly checking for either inputs from these. Now if I were to put my hand in front of this, it's probably going to be hard to see in the video, but in the bottom corner here, it's going to be reading, it's going to be showing you what the distance is. If I push in this button, right now that push sensor, that touch sensor, it says 0, but when I push it, it says 1. Off, 1 means on. Off, on. So let's now get this thing to drive and do certain things here. Right? So I'm going to say, let's start with, this is a forever loop. And I'll explain why we need that. So we have wait, we have forever, and then this is the other one that's going to be very important today. It's going to be an if statement, an if-then statement. So this is going to be happening forever right now. So this is a loop. We have it on infinity, which is what we would like. but just to show you, if you click on that little infinity, we have a couple options. We can say, hey, we want this to loop until something happens, and then we can break out from this loop. Okay, so for instance, this would say, I want you to continue to do this until the color sensor is triggered to do something, and then I want you to move on. For today, we want to do forever. You could also say, I want this to loop maybe 5 times and then end. We're using infinity today. So we want it to constantly be checking an if-then statement. That's going to be this block down here. So I want you to drag that up, and I need you to snap that inside of the forever loop. Now, if it did not automatically select the touch sensor and it selected the ultrasonic sensor, we're going to do the touch sensor first. So make sure you select the touch sensor, okay? And it says, indeed, it is in port 4. We can check that here. We can also look at the wiring, but it is in port 4. Underneath it, there's a number 1, and that means something. So number 1 means if that is pressed, I want you to do something. Release means if it is not pressed, I want you to do something. Bumped means the second that it hits something, then I want you to do something. Okay? So if this is released, let's start with that. Go ahead and change this to 0. So if your touch sensor is not being pushed, what I would like for it to do is I would like for it to drive forward. So go and pause the video. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you can see a little better. It's maybe a little better. There you go. So it should look like this. If your touch sensor is not pressed, I want you, which means the checkbox, I want you to do whatever is here under the checkbox. Go ahead and take a moment, pause the video please, make sure your code looks just like this. Okay, I'm going to change this because I don't want it to be number of rotations. This is just going to be rotating one tire rotation. I want this to be on, meaning it's running forever. So the motors are running out of B and C. That's correct. They're running at 75 power, and they're going forward. Perfect. If that is not pressed, this is not pressed, I want you to continue to drive forward. If this statement is not true, so if it is not pressed, right? The opposite of this. So this is if it's not pressed, which means if it's pressed, I want you to do whatever is under the X. So the check mark means if this is true, meaning it's not pressed, do this. If this is false, meaning it is pressed, I want you to do this. And there's a couple ways we can do the next step here. What we're going to tell the robot to do is drive forward until it hits something. Okay? Drive, 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 bump into something, and then we're going to back up and rotate. And then we're going to drive, 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 and back up and rotate. So we can do that a couple ways. We can either do it by just grabbing one motor and saying, I want you to have negative power, which means back up. Okay, let's say 6 rotations. I'm not sure if that's the answer or not. Okay, but that's what we're just for example, we're going to use that. So picture this. If this is not pressed, both motors are driving forward. If it is pressed, the B is going to rotate in the opposite direction. So it's going to actually just pivot it because only one wheel is rotating in the opposite direction. The other way that we can do this, let me grab this piece out of here, is you may have noticed in your driving, there's a way that we can get this thing to turn around. Okay, and you can figure that one out on your own. What we cannot have it do, though, is right now we have it on, and it's constantly running. On this one, we can't just constantly have it running in the opposite direction because that is only going to be something that's going to happen for a certain period of time. Okay? What is going to happen here is if we tell it to rotate in the opposite direction, okay, or just simply back up, but we need to tell it to turn a little bit. Okay, you can play around with this and you can get this to figure this out. But if we only tell it to go on in the opposite direction, it's going to happen forever until this is released. So the second it bumps it, it's going to run backwards. It's going to check this again. So I would like for you to use rotations for today's example to get it to rotate backwards. So if that is not touched, drive forward. If it is touched, I want you to figure out how do you get it to back up just enough, maybe turn it a 90 degree or a little further. So that way when we drive forward, we're not driving right back into the wall or whatever we ran into. So now let's play around with the ultrasonic sensor. Here's what we're going to do here. We're going to actually do the exact same thing to start. We're going to do a start button. So we have two separate programs essentially running here. I'm going to grab this forever loop again. That's an if then. My fault. There we go. There's my forever loop. And let's now snap the if then inside of it. Doesn't want to go inside of it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually have a separate program running at the same time that's going to be using the ultrasonic sensor. So what I need to do is I'm going to grab another start block here. I need to grab a forever loop, which again, that's the middle one. Grab that, drop it here. And then the last one here is another if then. So let's put this inside. So once again, it's going to constantly be checking what's happening inside. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to constantly be checking the state of whatever this sensor is. Now we have it as a touch sensor here. That's what it automatically put in. Now I want to change this to be ultrasonic. Do not choose infrared. I know they look similar. Ultrasonic sensor. And we're going to hit compare, and we're going to do it in inches. That's fine. Great. So now down here, we have a number 4. If I touch the number 4, here are our math functions. So if it is less than 50 inches, that's what we have here, I want you to do this. Otherwise, I want you to do this. So we're going to keep it at less than, but let's change this to, let's say 10. Great. So if the ultrasonic sensor detects that it's less than 10 inches, what I want it to do, this will be fun, I want you to grab this little brick down here, and we click on where it says Mindstorms, and let's do some expressions. Okay? If it is less than 10 inches, meaning we're getting close to something, I want it to be an upset face, an angry face. I'll give you an option here. You can either do expressions, or you can go back and you can do eyes. Okay, you can find some eyes. Doesn't matter to me. Okay, skull and crossbones, crying eyes, angry eyes, something that says it's upset. Maybe it's sick, whatever. Okay, something that's a negative expression. So if it's less than 10 inches, I want you to do angry eyes. That's what I'm going to choose. Great. Otherwise, meaning it is the opposite of this, okay? So if it's greater than 10 inches, we're happy. We're a happy robot. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to drag display up again. I'm going to click on eyes. Let's make them love eyes. That looks wonderful. So we have two different programs running here. So let's check these out and see how these work. If I were to hit run, downloading. All right, we're driving forward, we're driving forward, we're driving forward. I push this here. Look at that. One wheel rotates backwards. That's good. Okay, and then once it's done, it's going to go forward, forward, forward. Now you may also notice my love eyes, because my hand is beyond 10 inches. Now if I bring my hand closer, angry eyes, happy eyes, angry eyes. We stop this program by pushing here. Great. And that is our program for today. I'm going to add one more thing. And this is going to be really important. You can figure out how you want to do this. The issue with our touch sensor, let me move the code out of the way. The issue with this touch sensor as it is you might run into something here, right? So we need to put something to stick out a little bit further. I'm going to grab one of these little sticks here. Great. And in fact, if this runs into this, it pushes that sensor in. I'm going to add, just for me, you don't have to, you can find another piece, you can build something on the front of this. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to add a little piece here. So that way, it's kind of a little bit bigger of a surface for it to touch. So if it, let's say the wall is kind of like this, right, and it's driving, it can push that as opposed to having a stick hit it straight on. Just gives a little bit more surface area. Once you have completed this video and you have your Ev3 program to do exactly what I have it do here, drive forward when it runs into something, back up, and then we have some distance sensors. I would like for you to take a screenshot of the code here, take a screenshot of it, and that's going to be your exit ticket for today.